A passenger train rolls through the Arizona desert at track speed in the middle of the night under clear desert skies. The signals ahead are green, the track looks fine, and the crew has no reason to slow down. And then the lead locomotive drops off the rails, and 4 cars tumble 30 feet into a dry wash below. One crew member did not survive that night. 78 people were injured, and many were taken to hospitals. This was one of America's oldest named passenger trains, dating back to 1894, and someone with a claw bar and a piece of wire had just put it in a ditch without triggering a single warning. The question isn't who did it, because 30 years later, nobody knows the answer to that. The question is why it was so easy to do in the first place. The vulnerability. Railroad tracks stay in place because of spikes, steel spikes driven through the rail base into wooden ties. Typically, there are several spikes per tie, 2 for each rail, and thousands of them per mile. A single spike does not do much on its own, and neither do 5 or 10. What keeps a rail locked in position is cumulative friction across dozens of spikes working together, each one adding a bit of resistance until the combined force is enough to hold everything stable under the weight and lateral pressure of a passing train. At a remote location near Palo Verde, at a place known as Quail Springs Wash in the Arizona desert, someone had removed 29 of those spikes from one rail. Every spike came out on the inside of a curve, right before a bridge that crossed a dry riverbed 30 feet below. With that many spikes gone, the rail was free to move, and it shifted about 4 inches inward from where it was supposed to sit. 4 inches does not sound like much until you understand what happens when a train wheel enters a curve at speed. The wheel pushes outward against the outer rail, which is normal and expected, but the inner rail is supposed to guide the truck through the turn. When that rail has shifted, the geometry fails completely. The flange climbs over the railhead instead of staying in the gauge, and once one wheel derails, everything coupled behind it follows into the dirt. That is the physical sabotage, and it would have been enough on its own. But whoever set this up was not leaving anything to chance. The signal bypass. American railroads use track circuits as part of their signaling systems. The concept is simple. Electrical current runs through the rails, and the system is designed to detect certain changes in the circuit that can force signals to a more restrictive indication. At Quail Springs Wash, the rail was not broken, just shifted, so the current still flowed and the signal stayed green. Investigators later noted that a bypass wire had been installed, keeping the circuit closed at the sabotage point and preventing the system from indicating a problem. Current flows through the wire instead of the compromised rail. The system registers no problem, and the signal shows green to any approaching train. That is not brute force. That suggests familiarity with how railroad signaling works. Whoever did this understood how track circuits work, understood that signaling was the only automated protection between a shifted rail and a catastrophic derailment, and understood exactly how to defeat it with a piece of wire worth less than $1. What the crew never saw. The locomotive engineers working that train had absolutely no chance to prevent what happened. This was not a failure of attention or judgment or professional competence. The track looked completely normal. The signals were green, no speed restriction, no slow order, no radio warning. Nothing at all suggested anything was wrong with the track they were crossing. At track speed, by the time the lead truck hit the shifted rail, there was no time to react. The first indication of a problem was the derailment itself. The crew did nothing wrong because the system gave them nothing to work with, and the person who set this up knew exactly what that would mean. The wreck. The train consisted of 2 locomotives and 12 passenger cars. Both locomotives derailed immediately on impact. 8 of the 12 cars left the track, and 4 dropped 30 feet into the wash below. 1 crew member did not survive. Contemporaneous reporting identified him as sleeping car attendant Mitchell Bates. 12 passengers were seriously injured. Dozens more had cuts and broken bones. The site was remote, and early reports described rescue access as difficult due to the terrain. What investigators found? FBI agents reached the scene within hours, and what they found made it immediately clear this was no accident. The removed spikes were stacked neatly beside the track, not hidden but placed deliberately. The bypass wire was still in place. Under rocks along the right-of-way, agents found 4 identical typewritten notes. The notes referenced Waco and Ruby Ridge, and they were signed by a group calling itself the Sons of the Gestapo. The FBI investigated that name extensively and was unable to substantiate that the group existed. Investigators later described the notes as likely misdirection, meant to send investigators chasing political ghosts while the actual perpetrator disappeared into the desert. At its peak, 90 FBI agents worked the investigation. They called it Operation Split Rail. It became a large-scale investigation, and it produced 0 arrests. The location was the fundamental problem. Quail Springs Wash sits 70 miles from Phoenix, deep in empty desert, with no witnesses, no cameras, and no traffic at that hour. Someone could drive out at night, spend time pulling spikes and running wire, and leave without a single person ever seeing them. The physical evidence was minimal because this type of sabotage does not require much. A claw bar, wire, and hand tools were enough. There were no explosives to trace and no chemicals to analyze. Nothing at the scene could be easily tracked. Contemporary reports noted limited traceable evidence at the scene. The 1939 parallel. 56 years earlier, almost the exact same thing happened on the same railroad tracks. Near Harney, Nevada in 1939, the city of San Francisco derailed on a bridge in the desert at night. 24 people did not survive. Spikes had been removed, the rail shifted inward, and a bypass wire was installed to keep the track circuit from detecting the damage. The saboteur had even painted the displaced rail to match the surrounding ballast so it would not be visible from an approaching locomotive. That case was never solved either. 1 week before the Sunset Limited derailment, a railroad magazine published a detailed article about the 1939 sabotage. The FBI interviewed the author and requested subscriber lists. None of the resulting leads produced an arrest. The aftermath. Amtrak rerouted the Sunset Limited to run south of Phoenix after the derailment. Amtrak no longer serves Phoenix directly, and the derailment route was abandoned for through passenger service. Phoenix remains a major U.S. city without direct Amtrak service. The vulnerability that made this possible has not changed. The basic idea behind track circuits has not changed since 1995, or even 1939. Remote stretches of desert track are still remote. The system still relies on the assumption that nobody is actively trying to break it. The FBI reward currently stands at $310,000. The case remains open. Whoever removed those spikes and installed that wire was never caught. The signal showed green until the moment of derailment. The crew had no warning. The system designed to protect them had already been quietly switched off.